Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was halfway through the evening tour, standing with my back to the arena floor and the floodlit arches, when I felt the small tremor that meant the lights were about to trip. After 15 years as a licensed guide, you learn the rhythms of the Colosseum like a second pulse. The low hiss in the fixtures, the faint click from a junction box somewhere behind the service doors, the way visitors shuffle when a breeze threads the galleries from the east entrance. I was explaining the underground passages to a group of 14 when the floodlights blinked hard enough to draw every face to the sky. A few people laughed the way people laugh at turbulence. Then the entire amphitheater went black. Phones came out at once. The central ring lay in a dim bowl, traced by the ghostly glow of screens. For 1 second, there was only the murmur of hundreds of voices. Other tours, couples, a school group near the west corridor. Then, from somewhere beyond the outer wall, down where the Via dei Fuori Imperiali fans toward Piazza Venezia, someone screamed. It rolled into the Colosseum through its open arcades and was joined by another, closer. My group went silent. Even the kids stopped tugging at their parents' sleeves. "It's just a power cut," I said, keeping my voice flat and practical. "They happen. Stay with me." A chorus of notifications chimed from every pocket. No service bars moved. A student with a denim jacket lifted his phone and said that the metro had shut down. Someone had posted it before his feed froze. Another message thread flashed across a different screen, something about medical teams at Termini. I moved the tour toward the nearest stair, not because I knew it was safer, but because I wanted them out of the open. The Colosseum is honest about its age when the lights go out. It becomes exactly what it is: stone, iron, stairwells, gates. At the arch that leads to the inner corridor, a security guard wearing a high-visibility vest was setting down a flashlight for an older couple. He was speaking quickly into a radio, receiving only static. I recognized him. Lorenzo, evening shift, because I'd lent him a pen the week before. He glanced up and made eye contact long enough to telegraph 2 words without saying them. "Stay calm." We had just started climbing when the first wave of people burst in from the outer ring, faces white, breathless, pushing us toward the wall. "Close the gates!" someone yelled in Italian, and then in English. "Something's happening outside." The cadence of the crowd changed from tourist hum to that heavy, subsonic pressure you feel in a station when a train is delayed and patience turns to fear. I saw 2 teenagers stumbling in from the direction of the Colosseo Line B entrance, one with a forearm wrapped in a scarf. The scarf was dark in the beam of a phone. They weren't running from a scuffle. They were running from something that kept coming. I got my group up to the 2nd level, toward a section of seating that overlooks the arena, and counted them quickly. 14, a French family of 5, a retired American couple named Tom and Barbara, 3 students from Spain, a solo traveller from Seoul who had asked smart questions about the Hypogeum, a Brazilian photojournalist named Gabriella, and 2 Italians from Bari on their honeymoon. Everyone intact. The lights tried to come back, failed, and left a few stressed emergency lamps glowing in the corridors. Thin green signs above exits pointing to familiar arrows. The Colosseum has been managed long enough to be practical when modern systems fail. Doors are labelled, fire extinguishers live in the corners, maintenance rooms are marked on staff maps. I knew where they were. The screams from the Fori side turned into a ragged roar that didn't crest. People in the galleries were now pointing their phone lights outward between the arches, toward the square. I went to the balustrade and looked down across the low wall, past the travertine curve that frames the outer ring. In the spill of phone screens, I saw a tide of figures moving through the plaza. There was a rhythm to it. People ran, then stumbled, and then a second wave followed, with an unnatural persistence. I saw someone trip near the Arch of Constantine and get swarmed by 3 or 4 figures, who knelt and leaned over with feral intent. I could not understand it as anything but senseless violence. except that it didn't look like people fighting. It looked like people losing themselves completely. The first of the infected entered through the east gate where the staff usually check tickets with handheld scanners. He hit the metal stanchion hard enough to knock it over and came on, arms held strangely, head tilted as if scenting. His face was wrong, not monstrous, just absent, stripped of anything you could talk to. Two more followed him, one in a shirt from a souvenir stand, one in the blue windbreaker I knew the Metro police wore on colder nights. They didn't rush, they simply moved through obstacles as though physics were a suggestion. Lorenzo tried to block them with a roll-down chain barrier and a "stop, stand back" in clear Italian, then English. He might as well have been instructing fog. When the first one reached him, Lorenzo rammed his flashlight into the man's sternum and pushed him into the wall. The man's arms pinwheeled, not to regain balance but to reach for the nearest living thing. It happened fast, and it did not look choreographed. Lorenzo shoved again, cursed, then hit the alarm on his radio and shouted for staff to close the inner arches. We heard more gates slamming. A woman in a tour group cried out in pain from the stair. Someone dropped a camera that skittered across stone. I got my group into one of the upper galleries that could be closed by a pair of inward swinging gates. We pushed them shut and wrapped the chain through. There was no padlock, only a hook. I slid a metal bench into the jamb and wedged a stanchion under the handle for leverage, then had the bigger members of the group press their backs against it. In the sudden relative quiet inside the gallery, I spoke low and gave each person something to do. The French father, Armand, checked everyone for injuries. The American, Tom, said he had served in the Marines decades ago and knew how to keep people moving in an emergency. He didn't try to take over. He asked what I needed. I needed calm, eyes, and hands. "Listen," I said, "we don't know what's happening. Our job is to stay together and get higher. The upper tiers have narrower stairs. We can control narrow. Stay with me. Do not run alone. Do not push." We moved by feel along the curve of the gallery. The ancient masonry bled cool air through cracks. The tourists' shoes made a whisper like canvas sails on the stone. Behind us, at the gate, something thudded twice. Human weight testing metal. Tom and Armand braced it and I felt the chain surge. It was the kind of force you associate with a panicked animal. It didn't stop when it met resistance. It simply kept applying pressure as if the mind on the other side had no other plan but this. At stair 4, a narrow, steep flight that feeds an upper corridor, I found the small red door with a symbol for maintenance. The key cylinder was standard. I'd watched a cleaner open it 100 times. In a recessed niche nearby hung a fire extinguisher with its bracket held by 2 screws. I told Gabriella and the Spanish students to cover their ears and then swung the extinguisher's base into the lock. On the second blow, the faceplate cracked free. I turned the spindle with the broken edge. The door opened on the smell of oils, a rack of tools, and neatly stacked cartons of bottled water that would have been restocked for the next daytime shift. There was also a shelf with 2 staff radios on charging docks, still showing a vestige of battery. I handed out bottles, passed around compact LED work lights, and reached for the radios. A burst of static and a half sentence in Italian cut through. "Units at Fori, keep," then nothing. I tried the other channel, got a tone, and then a voice that could have been one of the custodians. "If you hear this, shut gates and go up. Do not use the exits to the east." Another voice overlapped, breathless, asking for someone by name and getting no answer. Batteries died during the second call. The radios went to silence. We were not staying where we were. The Colosseum feels safe on higher levels because you see everything, but it is also a trap. The outer ring is open, but the approaches are wide and exposed. In the dark, the arena floor becomes a basin. If we waited, we would be surrounded. We moved the group up the stairs in pairs, Tom trailing to hold the choke point with the extinguisher, me leading with an LED lamp pointed at the steps. The Italian couple clung to each other but did what I asked. The solo traveller, the one from Seoul, moved with focused efficiency, sharing her light and reminding others to breathe. Her name was Minji. I learned it when she asked, politely, whether it was wise to keep a steady beam on. It wasn't. We switched to intermittent light that painted the stairwell in short, careful bursts. On the third level, the acoustic changed. The sound from the square had flattened, either because the crowd had dispersed or because the tide had moved inside. At a western gallery that looked toward the Palatine Hill, we paused long enough to take stock. The air from the arches was cool and damp. A faint smell came with it, metallic and stale the way air smells in a closed elevator. Out on the pavement, a blue and white Polizia Roma Capitale car sat with its doors open. Its light bar was dark. I could make out the lump shapes of scooters on their sides, and a bus at a strange angle across the lane. It was the geometry of a sudden stop without a follow-on plan. Down on the arena floor, we saw movement in the emergency lamp's low glow. 3 security staff moving along the curve with their flashlights, guiding stragglers to a stair. A teenager was separated from them by a knot of infected that surged against a closed gate, then spilled around it through an opening. The teen froze. A woman in a staff polo dashed back and grabbed him by the hoodie. The infected collided with the gate's bars and then reached through with both arms, as if irresistibly drawn. The staffers hauled the boy away. I felt relief like heat in my chest and immediately converted it to caution. People were still saving each other. That mattered for morale. It didn't create us a safe path. The facts we had were these: citywide blackout, sudden mass assaults that did not look like robbery or protest, no effective response on the ground yet. The radios had died, phones were spotty, the metro was out, ambulances were not here. The Carabinieri barracks near Piazza Venezia might be up, or they might be similarly blind. If we could reach the Capitoline Hill, the Palazzo Senatorio, and the buildings around the Piazza del Campidoglio, we might find doors and walls and people with radios that worked. To get there from the Colosseum on foot during a blackout, you have 2 choices: the direct line across the Via dei Fori Imperiali and up the gentle slope toward the Vittoriano, or the narrower path through the lanes behind the Forum, skirting the Palatine side and climbing from the back. The direct route is quick but open. The lanes are slower but controllable. With a group that included a child and 2 tourists in their 70s, I chose the latter. The challenge was reaching any exit that wasn't just another mouth of the stadium. The solution was an old service corridor I knew from construction tours. A tunnel-like passage that leads from the inner ring toward a staff door near the Arch of Constantine. If we could reach it and then cut across the grass to the road, we could hook into the lanes by the Basilica of Santi Cosma e Damiano and climb from there. I conveyed this without drama and asked people for consent. They gave it with the precision of people who understand that talking is an energy cost. We gathered the tools we could carry: 2 fire extinguishers, a crate of water, 6 basic first aid kits, 2 radios that were now just dead weight, but might be useful later if we found power, a coil of chain, 3 metal stanchions with heavy bases that made serviceable poles, a pry bar, and a roll of gaffer tape from the maintenance shelf. We distributed loads so no one person was encumbered beyond what they could move with. The gallery gate shuddered again, then bowed slightly in its hinge. A palm pushed through the gap, fingers splayed and questing. Armand swore under his breath and added his shoulder to it. The pressure didn't build in a wave. It was constant, like a hydraulic piston. It did not heed the protests on the other side. It did not stop when the knuckles scraped and skin split. It simply pressed. I told Tom to swap with Armand and give him a breath. When Tom braced, the motion steadied. We left through the rear of the maintenance room, down a little spine of a corridor lit by emergency floor LEDs that looked like landing lights. The route bent and narrowed. Old stone worked like a muffler for the noise. My feet counted steps automatically. 32 down, then 20 across, then another 10. We came to a steel door with a crash bar and a translucent panel. Beyond it, a rectangle of night with moving shadows. I told everyone to get low and quiet. When we go, we stay together. If you lose contact, don't run, stop and call. We keep each other in sight. I opened the door an inch and looked out. The grass between the Colosseum and the arch glistened faintly with dew. The arch's silhouette loomed like an unanswered question. On the far side of the lawn, near the road, a small group of civilians moved with the cautious discipline of people who had already had a bad hour. One carried a long tool handle. Another had a reflective armband. They were headed toward the same lanes I had in mind. Closer to us, at the edge of the grass, two shapes moved with that relentless gait I had begun to recognize. One turned toward the door, as if it could feel the difference in the air from our side. We went 2 by 2, Tom and me first, then the students with the water, then the families. Minji brought up the rear, with the second extinguisher and a stanchion. The first of the infected on the grass spun at the sound of our shoes. It quickened without sprinting. Its arms lifted as if ready to embrace, but the posture was predatory. I angled our path to give Tom a line to it and said, "Base strike, then move." He nodded once. When the figure reached striking range, Tom stepped to his left and drove the heavy base of the stanchion into the side of the knee. The sound was dull. The figure toppled without a cry, clawing at the ground even as it fell. There was no pause for pain, no complaint. I put the second stanchion between its hands and our legs, and we flowed past. I did not look back at its face. I counted heads the way I always do when we cross a street with a tour. 14. The lawn gave way to the paved area by the arch. The road beyond was full of abandoned vehicles, some with doors open, one with a driver inside slumped against a window. The driver's breath fogged the glass. He was alive, either hiding or deciding. A woman ran past us from the direction of the metro entrance, waving her arms at the car and shouting for someone named Paolo. A shape moved in the car's back seat. We did not stop. If we stopped for every emergency, we would become one. On the cobbles, the group broke into a quick walk. Running would scatter us in 10 seconds. I set a pace that felt too slow for panic, but fast enough to make us breathe. The lanes by the Basilica of Santi Cosma e Damiano take you past low fences and hedges. In a blackout, they are darker than you expect. We used the phone lights in brief pulses to find the curb edges and kept the beams low so we were less visible from the open spaces. I gave the child in the French family a job, counting 1, 2, when he held his mother's hand tighter, because jobs demolish fear when you are small and the world is loud. At the corner by the Basilica, a municipal maintenance truck had mounted the curb and rested against a hedge. Its hazard lights blinked, then died. The battery surrendered. The passenger door hung open and a toolbox lay spilled in the gutter. I scanned it for something we could use and grabbed 2 pairs of work gloves and a roll of reflective tape. The gloves went to Minji and Gabriella. The tape went around the arms of the people in the rear so I could see them with a flash. The climb toward the Capitoline is a set of connected ramps and stairs. The first ramp was clear. The second opened onto a small square where a souvenir stand had pulled its shutter in hurry and spilled postcards into the street. 3 figures emerged from the side lane, the first moving like a terrified man, the second too, with that same flat, intent focus. The man yelled and ran toward us without seeing who we were. I held up a palm and said "stop" in Italian. He stopped because the word found something human left. The pair behind him did not. Tom swung the extinguisher once and then sprayed a white cloud in their faces. They flinched from the force, and we moved past the man, pulling him with us by his sleeve. He was a municipal electrician named Sandro, and he had been trying to reach a service panel at Trajan's Forum when the grid went down. He had seen 2 co-workers attacked in a way he could not process. He said attacked and bit, then shook his head and said he didn't know what he was saying. He didn't ask to join us. He fell in step because people naturally gather into groups that look like they have a plan. I asked him if he had a master key that would open anything on the hill. He did, a ring that rattled with brass. At the bottom of the final slope, just before the stairs that deliver you into Michelangelo's Piazza del Campidoglio, we saw our first police presence. 2 officers of the Carabinieri stood behind a parked Alfa Romeo with its hood up, rifles low, eyes scanning. Their radio crackled as if underwater. The younger officer's face brightened when he saw us. He pointed to the stairs and said, "Inside, move. We're holding the square." The older officer directed 2 civilians up the steps with a controlled hand. He had the calm of someone who had already made a decision to be useful and was executing it 1 minute at a time. We filed past them and climbed into the piazza. Even in the dark, it was beautiful. The geometric paving pattern, the senator's palace at the head, the equestrian statue in the middle, all were ghosts in the ambient light. The doors of the Palazzo Sanatorio were open, and a cluster of staff and officers worked to move people through. A woman with a badge from the Municipal Emergency Office stood on a chair, giving clear, steady instructions. "Inside, ground floor, to the right. Water is available. Stay together. We will give information when we have it." We entered a large hall where temporary lamps had been set on tables. The effect was of a stage backstage. Edges in shadow, center lit. Faces relieved to see something like infrastructure. Someone handed out small paper cups of water. The Italian couple sat down and put their heads together. The French family's son coughed from the dust of the extinguisher and then smiled at the cup like it was a trophy. Gabriella took out her press credential and asked the emergency officer if she could help by recording names. The officer nodded and said, "Later. For now, stay." I introduced myself to the officer as a local guide who knew the area and offered to help, then asked plain questions in a plain tone. "Do you have a working radio with the city? Do you know what is happening?" She shook her head once. "We have fragments. The hospitals are overloaded. We have multiple incidents of violent individuals. Many are not responsive to commands. We have reports that they continue to move after being injured. We have a blackout affecting a wide area, not only here. If you have medical training, we need you." She looked at my group. "Anyone?" Minji lifted a hand. "Basic first aid," she said. Tom said he could help with triage. Armand could help with logistics. Sandro had his keys and a brain for circuits. The officer looked relieved in a way that didn't show on her face, only in her shoulders. She introduced herself as Elisa, Emergency Coordination. "We are setting up a triage room. We need doors secured and a plan to control access. The main doors will stay open with officers. The side doors should be closed." I turned to my group. "We're staying together, but we're not passive. If you need to sit, sit. If you can help, help. We rotate and we keep our water. No one goes alone." We had been moving for an hour. The blackout held. The city beyond felt like a heavy animal breathing irregularly. In the corridor off the main hall, a side office had already become a first aid station. Minji helped set out supplies. Tom organized a simple line so people didn't crowd. I took Sandro to the service hallway and found the electrical panels. He knelt and opened them with his keys and a small flashlight. The breakers were tripped across entire banks. He reset a few that made sense for the building's essential circuits. The hall lights flickered and then held at a low, restrained brightness that made every person in that corridor straighten. Electricity is not abstract when you've been without it for an hour during fear. It is proof that the world still has systems. Elisa's radio barked. "Units pulling back from Fori. Too many. Defensive line at the steps." We went to the balcony that overlooks the piazza. The younger carabinieri from below had fallen back up the stairs and were now using the higher ground. Civilians were coming through in small knots, and with them, a few infected who had followed. The officers had set portable barriers at the top step and were controlling the influx. When an infected reached the barrier, the older officer used measured force, not rage. He didn't fire wildly. He placed his shots where they would stop the threat decisively. This was not a movie scene. It was a practiced professional managing a crisis. I scanned the edges of the square for ways the infected could flow around us and saw two. A narrow lane by the Capitoline Museums and a service driveway on the opposite side. I told Elisa we needed them sealed. Sandro's keys got us into the first, where we dragged a heavy metal planter across the narrow gap and wedged it between stone posts. In the second, we used a municipal trash container and a chain from a storage area to close it. It would not stop anyone determined. but it would funnel movement into space we controlled. That mattered more than perfect closure. Back in the hall, people began to do the things people do. When they accept, they will be somewhere for a while. They asked for bathrooms. They shared chargers. They showed each other photos of relatives to watch for. The French mother wrote their names on the child's forearm with a marker, not to be dramatic, but to ensure he had them if he were separated. I moved between stations, answering questions where I could and saying, "We don't know yet," when I could not. I didn't feed rumors. Elisa made a small speech every 20 minutes with the same message. It made people trust the voice, not the content. From the balcony, I watched the square. The infected did not climb in a wave. They came in ones and twos, relentlessly, like a bad memory you can't fully forget. The officers were efficient and tired. I suggested we rotate civilians into barrier duty with the officers supervising, not to fight, but to spot and signal. Tom took the far side. Armand took the near. Minji stayed with first aid. Gabriella asked permission to take stills to document evacuation procedures, not faces of the injured. Elisa gave a cautious yes with the restriction that nothing be transmitted live. Around midnight, my best guess without a working clock, the pitch of the city changed again. From the direction of the river came the sound of heavy engines. The first vehicles I saw were not military. They were municipal dump trucks driving in convoy, hazard beacons blinking. They stopped at intersections and created improvised barricades, signaling with hand lamps to other drivers to turn around. The drivers were utility workers who had decided to do something concrete with the machines they had. 15 minutes later, through the south approach, I saw the distinct roofline of Carabinieri vans and a short wheelbase truck with a light mast. It pulled into the square below, deployed the mast, and filled the area with tall, cold light that cast deep shadows but gave definition to edges. The officers on the steps straightened again. Light is energy. A captain in a white top cap walked up the stairs with two troopers and spoke briefly with Elisa. The gist, as she relayed it to us, was this. The city was establishing temporary hubs at high-ground civic buildings. They had lost clear contact with multiple zones. Medical teams were moving under escort to hospitals. We were to hold here, with the expectation of a convoy that would move groups to safer sites at dawn or after, depending on conditions. That meant we had a plan with time in it. Time makes rules and rules prevent chaos. We set up a simple rotation for the rest of the night. 2 at the barrier with an officer, 2 watching the side lanes, 2 helping in first aid, the rest resting or sitting in the central hall. We made tea by plugging an electric kettle into a still-live circuit strip Sandro had coaxed into compliance. It tasted like metal and relief. People talked in low voices. Some cried in privacy behind a column and returned with eyes red but posture steady. The child slept with his head on his mother's lap, thumb in his clenched fist like he was trying to hold on to something. At some point, the teenagers from the metro entrance, one with a forearm wrapped in a scarf, came in with a staff member. The scarf-wrapped one had a shallow bite near the wrist. The teeth had not taken flesh, only scraped and bruised. Minji washed it thoroughly and wrapped it with sterile bandage. We observed, we did not speculate. The boy shivered and asked whether he should be separated. Elisa said calmly that we were not making camps, we were caring for injuries and staying vigilant. The staffer, Lorenzo, the guard from the Colosseum, hair soaked with sweat, met my eyes and smiled a tired smile that said he recognized me and was glad we had both done our jobs for 1 more hour. In the small hours, I walked the internal perimeter of the building with Sandro, checking doors and windows. We made notes on a piece of paper from a copier about which locks held well and which needed a chair wedged under them. We used gaffer tape to mark arrows on the floor toward exits and to place X marks near corners where someone should stand to direct movement if we needed to evacuate. Everything we did assumed the simplest thing. People will move where a clear sign tells them to move. Just before dawn, a slice of grey appeared behind the Vittoriano. The sky lightened not with romance but with relief, the kind that comes with the knowledge that you will be able to see approaching shapes before they reach you. The Carabinieri captain organized a coordinated sweep of the approaches with a half-dozen troopers, not to clear the entire district, but to push the infected back down the hill and create a corridor for vehicles. The municipal trucks moved again, relocating to block other lanes. A rumble approached from the direction of Via del Teatro di Marcello, a convoy of 4 vans and a medium truck with a Red Cross flag in the windshield. They were marked CRI, Croce Rossa Italiana. The drivers parked tight and quick. Paramedics jumped down, faces set, and began transferring the most vulnerable, elderly, injured, families with small children into the vans. Elisa read from a list. Tom and I helped load. Gabriella counted every person in and recorded a name and approximate age. Minji rode with the first van to assist. The plan, the captain said, was to move them to a secure campus on higher ground, where generators ran, and a field hospital had been established. Then the convoy would return. When the last van door shut, the captain turned to us. "We will do another round," he said. "You should be on the next one." I looked at my group. Some were nodding already. The Italian couple held hands stronger. The French family bundled their child's jacket. The students from Spain looked sober and ready. But I also looked downhill, toward the Colosseum. It sat in the grey like a giant bowl, its arches dark, its memory of the night thick in my mind. There were still people there. Some staff. Perhaps some visitors who had hidden in alcoves and not found a way out. I knew paths in and out that others might not. I could take a small team and check, then link up with the returning convoy at a different point. It was a risk. I measured it against what we owed to those who were still moving through the dark without a map. I told Eliza what I was thinking. She didn't say no. She weighed the cost. If you go with 2 officers and you carry radios. You check only the upper galleries and the corridor from the east gate. You do not go below or into the central arena. You return within 30 minutes. If we lose you, we do not send more after you tonight. Understood? Understood, I said. Tom put his hands on his hips and said, "If you're going, I'm going." Armand said, "Moi aussi." Minji looked torn and then shook her head. "I stay with triage. I will be here when you come back." The Italian couple would remain with the group and board the next convoy. Gabriella asked if she could come to document the evacuation routes. The captain said yes, if she stayed behind the officers. Sandro would stay to keep power stable. We set out at first light, down the stairs past the officers who had stood there through the darkest hour of their careers. 2 carabinieri came with us. One of them the older officer whose steadiness had anchored the night. His name, he told me, was Mancini. He handed me a spare radio. "Channel 3, he said. "If you hear it, you come back, no questions. If you say it, we are leaving before you finish the word." The city in early morning, after a night like that, is not the same city. A few birds sang, because birds sing regardless. Somewhere, a generator pitched its high note into the air. Shoes on stone made loud pops. We moved along the lower edges where the lanes turned to arcades. The scene at the base of the hill was quiet in an unnatural way, like an empty theatre after a performance where everyone left too fast. We reached the arch and scanned the lawn. No obvious movement. The Colosseum loomed with its hollow-eyed arched faces. We went in through the same service door, now propped open with a staff bucket. Inside, the air was cooler and carried the smell of spilled fire extinguisher powder and something sour. We moved to the maintenance corridor and then up the stairs to the second level, calling soft and steady. "Polizia, emergenza, che qualcuno?" A voice answered from deeper in. "Qui, aiuto." It was a woman, hoarse, contained. She was a museum educator who had locked herself and 3 teenagers in a small office when the first wave broke through. They had water and had kept quiet. She had waited until she heard the measured cadence of our steps, groups of 2, not the dragging, irregular rhythm of the infected, before calling. The kids were exhausted but uninjured. We got them moving. Gabriella breathed out a soft laugh that sounded like the release of a valve. "Bravi," she said. We made one more sweep of the upper galleries, resisting the urge to check the lower levels, and then called it. 4 rescued, returning. On the way out, we passed the gate where we had braced the chain. It had finally given and hung at a crooked angle. Beyond it, in the gallery, a few shapes lay against the wall. They did not move. We did not conduct forensic investigation. We moved past with purpose. Back at the piazza, the second convoy had arrived. We placed the educator and the teens into a van. The French family and the Italian couple boarded. Elisa checked their names off a sheet. She kept her voice even. She kept her head up. When it was our turn to board, the captain put a hand on my shoulder. "You're coming," he said. I looked at the square, at the officers who would remain, at Sandro by the panel, at Minji with a stack of bandages, at Gabriella recording a line of people moving into a vehicle in an orderly fashion. I looked at the city in the first honest light. It was bruised and alive. I thought about what would be useful in the next 6 hours. I could go and be one more person delivered to a safer building, or I could stay and help with one more rotation, one more sweep, one more set of arrows on the floor. "Next trip," I said. The captain studied me for a second that contained both approval and the knowledge that plans break. "Next trip," he said. We sent the convoy off with a wave. The vans moved like patient animals into a street newly arranged by municipal trucks and barricades. The Carabinieri truck's mast light arced down. The square came into natural day. People began to surface from doorways and alleys, blinking. A few of the infected wandered at the edges like stubborn glitches in a system. Officers steered them away, or, when necessary, stopped them with firm measures. The rules held because people held them. By late morning, a mobile generator rolled into the square. Sandro connected it with practiced hands. The building's lights stabilized and a low hum filled the rooms. A triage tent went up in the piazza for non-critical cases. Someone brought crates of shelf-stable food from a nearby office. It tasted like something designed to be eaten without thought, which made it perfect. The radio on Elisa's belt began to find more than static. Words formed into sentences. Units were linked. The city, bruised as it was, had not collapsed into silence. By early afternoon, the captain returned with a larger convoy. The plan was to move all non-essential civilians, meaning anyone not needed for the defense or medical stations, to a university complex on a rise with good perimeter control. "This is not defeat," he said. "This is consolidation." The word was right. It moved people without breaking them. Gabriella rode with this convoy to continue documenting. The French family hugged each of us and boarded. The Italian couple squeezed my hand and promised to check in if there was a system to check in through. The students from Spain bumped fists with Tom like they had trained together. Minji promised she would be at the university station in a few hours, and then, if she could, she would come back with the medical team. When it was our turn, we got in, not because we wanted to leave the work, but because rotations are how you sustain effort over days instead of hours. We rode through streets I knew by heart, now reconfigured around barricades and quiet intersections where the sound of a distant helicopter cut the air. The city was not dead. It was reorganizing under stress. In the van, Tom leaned back and finally let his eyes close. Armand texted his wife that he was safe and then put his phone away, conserving battery like a resource in a siege. I looked out the window at the Colosseum as it receded. It had always been a story to tell. Emperors, gladiators, the evolution of entertainment, the engineering of an era. Last night it had been a shelter and a trap, and then a starting point. It would be a place we came back to, not as tourists, but as people with responsibilities. People who knew now which gates could be chained, which stairs you could defend, which corridors made good passage in a blackout. The convoy turned up a hill and the view opened, a slice of Rome with the river like a ribbon and rooftops like stepping stones. In the lot outside the university building, Carabinieri and Croce Rossa volunteers had erected tents with efficient repetition. The entrance was controlled. The interior had lights and water and signs. A staffer gave us wristbands with numbers and wrote our names in a ledger. It was clinical, not demeaning. It said, "You exist here in a system that will not forget you." We were led to a room with cots and told to sleep for 2 hours, then returned to the intake desk for assignment. I sat on the cot and felt the last 20 hours arrive in my body all at once. The stairs, the way the chain had pulled my shoulder, the smell of stone, the sound of a child counting to keep fear in a shape he could hold. I lay down and closed my eyes, not to escape the images, but to file them somewhere I could retrieve them when the time came to explain to a city how it survived its first night. When I woke, I washed my face in a sink that dispensed warm water and nearly cried at the simple luxury of it. At the intake desk, they asked what I could do. I said I knew every alley around the forum, and I could speak to frightened people and make them move as one. They smiled and circled field liaison. I found Tom, who had been marked as security support, and Minji, who had arrived 30 minutes earlier with the medical team and was now washed, fed, and ready to go back. Gabriella was in a corner, already transferring notes and stills to a drive labelled with the date and the word Night 1. Before we went back out, a captain from the Carabinieri briefed us on new guidance. Keep distance from anyone showing signs of the syndrome. Avoid direct physical struggle. Use barriers. Do not engage unless you must protect someone. Call for trained units. He handed us each a surgical mask, not because masks would stop what we had seen, but because it was still the prudent thing to wear while working with many people in close spaces. He gave us small packets of disinfectant wipes and a laminated card with emergency frequencies. The card felt like a talisman. It was really a map. On our way down the university steps, a new convoy pulled in. On its lead vehicle's door was a small crest with a flame and the words Arma Dei Carabinieri. In the passenger seat sat a woman with a headset and a clipboard. She looked out at the line of people waiting to board and then at us moving the other way. She nodded once. It was the briefest exchange of respect and encouragement. We didn't need words for it. Back in the vans, I looked again at the city. The morning had burned off the strangeness of the night, leaving the structures I'd always loved doing their jobs. Steps, gates, walls, streets. The Colosseum would see us again. We would go back not to watch but to work, checking galleries, guiding more people out, closing doors we didn't need and opening ones we did. We would mark the floors with tape and arrows. We would put benches where we needed them. We would move for as long as we had to, until this thing that had come without warning met a city that refused to let it decide what the next hour would be. And when we were tired, we would sleep for exactly the amount of time the plan allowed, and not 1 minute more. The van bumped over a seam in the road and steadied. I glanced at Tom. He opened one eye. "Next trip," he said, like we had agreed. I nodded. Outside, the Colosseum rose ahead, stone and shadow and memory, the place where an evening tour had turned into a night of decisions, and the beginning of a fight, not for glory, but for order, for each other, for the right to stand tomorrow in a city that still had names for its streets and lights for its halls. We rolled toward it, not as visitors now, but as part of the team that would write the second chapter of the same night. We would keep doing this until the convoys didn't need to return, until the lights stayed on, until the radio stopped sounding like rain and began to sound like normal again. That was the plan. That was enough for the next hour. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.